So this is part 3. Crawley, somewhere west of Amsham, hustled through the night, snatched a bit at random, and tried to wrestle it out of his brittle plastic box while staying on the road. The glare of a headlight proclaimed it to be Vivaldi's Four Seasons. Soothing music, that's what he needed. He rammed it into the Blowplunket. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. What? Why now? Why me? He muttered as the familiar strains of Queen washed over him. And suddenly, Freddie Mercury was speaking to him. Because you've earned it, Crawley. Crawley blessed under his breath. Using electronics as a means of communication had always been his idea, and Below had for once taken it up and, as usual, got it dead wrong. He'd hoped they could be persuaded to subscribe to Cellnet, but instead they just cut in to whatever it happened to be that he was listening to at the time and twisted it. Crawley groped. Thank you very much, Lord, he said. We have great faith in you, Crawley. Thank you, Lord. This is important, Crawley. I know. This is the big one, Crawley. Leave it to me, Lord. This is what we are doing, Crawley, and if it goes wrong, then those involved will suffer greatly, even you, Crawley, especially you. Understood, Lord. Here are your instructions, Crawley. And suddenly he knew. He hated that. They could just as easily have told them. They didn't suddenly have to drop chilly knowledge straight into his brain. He had to drive to a certain hospital. I'll be there in 5 minutes, Lord, no problem. Good. I see a little silhouette of a man. Scaramouche, will you do the fandango? Crawley thumped the wheel. Everything had been going so well. He'd had it really under his thumb these last few centuries. That's how it goes. You think you're on top of the world, and suddenly they spring Armageddon on you. The Great War, the last battle. Heaven versus hell, 3 rounds, 1 fall, no submission. And that'd be that. No more world. That's what the end of the world meant. No more world. Just endless heaven, or depending who won, endless hell. Crawley didn't know which was worse. Well, hell was worse, of course, by definition, but Crawley remembered what heaven was like, and it had quite a few things in common with hell. You couldn't get a decent drink in either of them, for a start, and the boredom you got in heaven was almost as bad as the excitement you got in hell. But there was no getting out of it. You couldn't be a demon and have free will. I will not let you go. Let him go. Well, at least it wouldn't be this year. He'd have time to do things, unload long-term stocks for a start. He wondered what would happen if he just stopped the car here, on this dark, damp, and empty road, and took the basket and swung it around and round and let it go, and something dreadful, that's what. He'd been an angel once. He hadn't meant to fall. He just hung around with the wrong people. The Bentley plunged on through the darkness, its fuel gauge pointing to 0. It had pointed to 0 for more than 60 years now. It wasn't all bad being a demon. You didn't have to buy petrol, for one thing. The only time Crawley had bought petrol was once in 1967 to get the free James Bond bullet hole in the windscreen transfers, which he rather fancied at the time. On the back seat, the thing in the basket began to cry, the air raid siren wail of the newly born, high, wordless, and old. It was quite a nice hospital, thought Mr. Young. It would have been quiet, too, if it wasn't for the nuns. He quite liked nuns. Not that he was, left-footed or anything like that. No, when it came to avoiding going to church, the church he solidly avoided going to was St. Cecil and All Angels. No-nonsense C of E. And he wouldn't have dreamed of avoiding going to any other. All the others had the wrong smell. Floor polish for the low, somewhat suspicious incense for the high. Deep in the leather armchair of his soul, Mr. Young knew that God got embarrassed at that sort of thing. But he liked seeing nuns around in the same way that he liked seeing the Salvation Army. It made you feel that it was all right, that people somewhere were keeping the world on its axis. This was his first experience of the Chattering Order of St. Beryl, however. And then it has a little footnote. St. Beryl Articulus of Caro, reputed to have been martyred in the middle of the 5th century. According to legend, Beryl was a young woman who was betrothed against her will to a pagan, Prince Casimir. On their wedding night, she prayed to the Lord to intercede, vaguely expecting a miraculous beard to appear. and she had in fact already laid in a small ivory-handled razor, suitable for ladies, against this very eventuality. Instead, the Lord granted Beryl the miraculous ability to chatter continually about whatever was on her mind, however inconsequential, without pause for breath or food. According to one version of the legend, Beryl was strangled by Prince Casimir 3 weeks after the wedding, with their marriage still unconsummated. She died a virgin and a martyr, chattering to the end. According to another version of the legend, Casimir bought himself a set of earplugs, and she died in bed with him at the age of 62. The Chattering Order of St. Beryl is under a vow to emulate St. Beryl at all times, except on Tuesday afternoons for half an hour, when the nuns are permitted to shut up, and if they wish, to play table tennis. Dedry had run across them while being involved in one of her causes, possibly the one involving lots of unpleasant South Americans fighting other unpleasant South Americans, and the priest egging them on instead of getting on with proper priestly concerns like organizing the church, cleaning Rhoda. The point was, none should be quiet. They were the right shape for it, like those pointy things you got in those chambers Mr. Young was vaguely aware your hi-fi got tested in. I shouldn't be, chattering all the time. He filled his pipe with tobacco. Well, they called it tobacco. It wasn't what he thought of as tobacco. It wasn't the tobacco you used to get, and wondered reflectively what would happen if you asked a nun where the gents was. Probably the Pope sent you a sharp note or something. He shifted his position awkwardly and glanced at his watch. One thing, though, at least the nuns had put their foot down about him being present at the birth. Dedry had been all for it. She'd been reading things again. One kid already, and suddenly she's declaring that this confinement was going to be the most joyous and sharing experience 2 human beings could have. That's what came of letting her order her own newspapers. Mr. Young distrusted papers whose inner pages has names like lifestyle or options. Well, he hadn't gotten anything against joyous sharing experiences. Joyous sharing experiences were fine by him. The world probably needed more joyous sharing experiences, but he had made it abundantly clear that this was one joyous sharing experience Dedry could have by herself. And the nuns had agreed. They saw no reason for the father to be involved in the proceedings. When you thought about it, Mr. Young mused, they probably saw no reason why the father should be involved anywhere. He finished thumbing the so-called tobacco into the pipe and glared at the little sign on the wall of the waiting room that said that for his own comfort he would not smoke. For his own comfort, he decided, he'd go and stand in the porch. If there was a discreet shrubbery for his own comfort out there, so much the better. He wandered down the empty corridors and found a doorway that led out onto a rain-swept courtyard full of righteous dustbins. He shivered and cupped his hands to light his pipe. It happened to them at a certain age, wives, 25 blameless years, then suddenly they were going off and doing those robotic exercises in pink socks with their feet cut out, and they started blaming you for never having had to work for a living. It was hormones or something. A large black car skidded to a halt by the dustbins. A young man in dark glasses leaped out into the drizzle holding what looked like a carry cot and snaked towards the entrance. Mr. Young took his pipe out of his mouth. "You've left your lights on," he said helpfully. The man gave him the blank look of someone to whom's lights were the least of his worries, and waved a hand vaguely towards the Bentley. Lights went out. "That's handy," said Mr. Young. "Infrared, is it?" He was mildly surprised to see that the man did not appear to be wet, and that the carry cot appeared to be occupied. "Has it started yet?" said the man. Mr. Young felt vaguely proud to be so instantly recognizable as a parent. "Yes," he said. "They made me go out," he added thankfully. "Already? Any idea how long we've got?" "We," Mr. Young noted, obviously a doctor with views about co-parenting. "I think we were, getting on with it," said Mr. Young. "What room is she in?" said the man hurriedly. "We're in room 3, said Mr. Young. He patted his pockets and found the battered packet, which, in accord with tradition, he had brought with him. Would we care to share a joyous cigar experience?" he said, but the man had gone. Mr. Young carefully replaced the packet and looked reflectively at his pipe. "Always Always in a rush, these doctors, working all the hours God sent. There's a trick they do with 1 pea and 3 cups, which is very hard to follow, and something like it for greater stakes than a handful of loose change is about to take place. The test will be slowed down to allow the sleight of hand to be followed. Mrs. Dedry Young is giving birth in delivery room 3. She is having a golden-haired male baby we will call Baby A. The wife of the American cultural attaché, Mrs. Harriet Dowling, is giving birth in delivery room 4. She is having a golden-haired male baby we will call Baby B. Sister Mary Loquacious has been a devout Satanist since birth. She went to Sabbat school as a child and won black stars for handwriting and liver. When she was told to join the Chattering Order, she went obediently, having a natural talent in that direction, and in any case, knowing that she would be among friends. She would be quite bright if she was ever put in a position to find out, but long ago found that being a scatterbrain, as she'd put it, gave you an easier journey through life. Currently, she is being handed a golden-haired male baby we will call the Adversary, Destroyer of Kings, Angel of the Bottomless Pit, Great Beast that is called Dragon, Prince of this World, Father of Lies, Spawn of Satan, and Lord of Darkness. Watch carefully. Round and round they go. Is that him? Said Sister Mary, staring at the baby. Only I'd expected funny eyes, red or green, or teensy-weensy little hoofykins, or a whittle tail. She turned him around as she spoke. No horns either. The devil's child looked ominously normal. Yes, that's him, said Crawley. Fancy me holding the Antichrist, said Sister Mary, and bathing the Antichrist, and counting his little toesy-woesies. She was now addressing the child directly, lost in some world of her own. Crawley waved a hand in front of her wimple. Hello, Sister Mary? Sorry, sir. He is a little sweetheart, though. Does he look like his daddy? I bet he does. Does he look like his daddy, Waddykins? No, said Crawley firmly. And now I should get to the delivery rooms if I were you. And will he remember when he grows up, do you think? Said Sister Mary wistfully, sidling slowly down the corridor. Pray that he doesn't, said Crawley, and fled. Sister Mary headed through the nighttime hospital with the Adversary, Destroyer of Kings, Angel of the Bottomless Pit, Great Beast that is called Dragon, Prince of this World, Father of Lies, Spawn of Satan, and Lord of Darkness, safely in her arms. She found a bassinet and laid him down in it. He gurgled. She gave him a tickle. A matronly head appeared around a door. It said, Sister Mary, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be on duty in room 4? Master Crowley said, Just glide along. There's a good nun. Have you seen the husband anywhere? He's not in the waiting room. I've only seen Master Crowley, and he told me. I'm sure he did, said Sister Grace Voluble firmly. I suppose I'd better go and look for the wretched man. Come in and keep an eye on her, will you? She's a bit woozy with that, but the baby's fine. Sister Grace paused. Why are you winking? Is there something wrong with your eyes? You know, Sister Mary hissed archly. The babies, the exchange. Of course, in good time, but we can't have the father wandering around, can we? Said Sister Grace. No telling what he might see, so just wait here and mind the baby. There's a dear. She sailed off down the polished corridor. Sister Mary, wheeling the bassinet, entered the delivery room. Mrs. Young was more than woozy. She was fast asleep with the look of determined self-satisfaction of someone who knows other people are going to have to do the running around for once. Baby A was asleep beside her, weighed and name-tagged. Sister Mary, who had been brought up to be helpful, removed the name tag, copied it out, and attached the duplicate to the baby in her care. The babies looked similar, both being small, blotchy, and looking sort of, though not really, like Winston Churchill. Now, thought Sister Mary, I could do with a nice cup of tea. Most of the members of the convent were old-fashioned Satanists, like their parents and grandparents before them. They'd been brought up to it and weren't, when you got right down to it, particularly evil. Human beings mostly aren't. They just get carried away by new ideas like dressing up in jack boots and shooting people, or dressing up in white sheets and lynching people, or dressing up in tie-dyed jeans and playing guitars at people. Offer people a new creed with a costume and their hearts and minds will follow. Anyway, being brought up a Satanist tended to take the edge off it. It was something you did on Saturday nights, and the rest of the time you simply got on with life as best you could, just like everyone else. Besides, Sister Mary was a nurse, and nurses, whatever their creed, are primarily nurses, which had a lot to do with wearing your watch upside down, keeping calm in emergencies, and dying for a cup of tea. She hoped someone would come soon. She'd done the important bit. Now she wanted her tea. It may help to understand human affairs to be clear that most of the great triumphs and tragedies of history are caused not by people being fundamentally good or fundamentally bad, but by people being fundamentally people. There was a knock at the door. She opened it. "Has it happened yet?" asked Mr. Young. "I'm the father, the husband, whatever, both." Sister Mary had expected the American cultural attaché to look like Blake Carrington or J.R. Ewing. Mr. Young didn't look like any American she'd ever seen on television, except possibly for the avuncular sheriff in the better class of murder mystery. The little footnote says, with a little old lady as a sleuth and no car chases unless they're done very slowly. He was something of a disappointment. She didn't think much of his cardigan either. She swallowed her disappointment. "Ooh, yes," she said. "Congratulations. Your lady wife's asleep. Poor pet." Mr. Young looked over her shoulder. "Twins?" he said. He reached for his pipe. He stopped reaching for his pipe. He reached for it again. "Twins? No one said anything about twins." "Oh, no," said Sister Mary hurriedly. "This one's yours. The other one's, someone else's. Just looking after him till Sister Grace gets back." "No," she reiterated, pointing to the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness. "This one's definitely yours, from the top of his head to the tips of his little hoofy-woofies, which he hasn't got," she added hastily. Mr. Young peered down. "Ah, yes," he said doubtfully. "He looks like my side of the family. All, present and correct, is he?" "Oh, yes," said Sister Mary. "He's a very normal child," she added. "Very, very normal." There was a pause. They stared at the sleeping baby. "You don't have much of an accent," said Sister Mary. "Have you been over here long?" "About 10 years," said Mr. Young, mildly puzzled. The job moved, you see, and I had to move with it." "It must be a very exciting job, I've always thought," said Sister Mary. Mr. Young looked gratified. Not everyone appreciated the more stimulating aspects of cost accountancy. "I expect it was very different where you were before," Sister Mary went on. "I suppose so," said Mr. Young, who'd never really thought about it. Lutton, as far as he could remember, was pretty much like Tadfield. The same sort of hedges between your house and the railway station. The same sort of people. "Taller buildings, for one thing," said Sister Mary desperately. Mr. Young stared at her. The only one he could think of was the Alliance and Leicester offices. "And I expect you go to a lot of garden parties," said the nun. Ah, he was on firmer ground here. Deidre was very keen on that sort of thing. "Lots," he said with feeling. "Deidre makes jam for them, you know, and I normally have help with the white elephant." This was an aspect of Buckingham Palace society that had never occurred to Sister Mary, although the psychoderm fitted right in. "I expect they're the tribute," she said. "I've read where these foreign potentates give her all sorts of things." "I'm sorry?" "I'm a big fan of the royal family, you know." "Oh, so am I," said Mr. Young, leaping gratefully onto this new ice floe in the bewildering stream of consciousness. "Yes, you knew where you were with the royals. The proper ones, of course, who pulled their weight in the hand-waving and bridge-opening department. Not the ones who went to discos all night long and were sick all over the paparazzi." It is possibly worth mentioning at this point that Mr. Young thought that paparazzi was a kind of Italian linoleum. "That's nice," said Sister Mary. "I thought you people weren't too keen on them, with the revolting and throwing all those tea sets into the river." She chattered on, encouraged by the order's instruction that members should always say what was on their minds. Mr. Young was out of his depth and too tired now to worry about it very much. The religious life probably made people a little odd. He wished Mrs. Young would wake up. Then one of the words in Sister Mary's whickering struck a hopeful chord in his mind. Would there be any possibility of me possibly being able to have a cup of tea, perhaps, he ventured. Oh my, said Sister Mary, her hand flying up to her mouth. Whatever am I thinking of? Mr. Young made no comment. I'll see to it right away, she said. Are you sure you don't want coffee, though? There's one of those vendable machines on the next floor. Tea, please, said Mr. Young. My word, you really have gone native, haven't you? Said Sister Mary gaily as she bustled out. Mr. Young, left alone with one sleeping wife and 2 sleeping babies, sagged onto a chair. Yes, it must be all that getting up early and kneeling and so on. Good people, of course, but not entirely compost mentis. He'd seen a Ken Russell film once. There had been lots of nuns in it. There didn't seem to be any sort of that thing going on, but no smoking without fire and so on. He sighed. It was then that Baby A woke and settled down to a really good wail. Mr. Young hadn't had to quiet a screaming baby for years. He'd never been much good at it to start with. He'd always respected Sir Winston Churchill, and patting small versions of him on the bottom had always seemed ungracious. Welcome to the world, he said wearily. You get used to it after a while. The baby shut its mouth and glared at him as if he were a recalcitrant general. Sister Mary chose that moment to come in with the tea. Satanist or not, she'd always found a plate and arranged some iced biscuits on it. They were the sort you only ever get at the bottom of certain tea time assortments. Mr. Young's was the same pink as a surgical appliance and had a snowman picked out on it in white icing. I don't expect you normally have these, she said. They're what you call cookies. We call them biscuits. Mr. Young had just opened his mouth to explain that yes, so did he, so did all the people in Lutton, when another nurse rushed in breathless. She looked at Sister Mary, realized that Mr. Young had never seen the inside of a pentagram, and confined herself to poking at Baby A and winking. Sister Mary nodded and winked back. The nun wheeled the baby out. As methods of human communication go, a wink is quite versatile. You can say a lot with a wink. For example, the new nun's wink said, Where the hell have you been? Baby B has been born. We're ready to make the switch, and here's in you with the wrong room, with the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness, drinking tea. Do you realize I've nearly been shot? And as far as she was concerned, Sister Mary's answering wink meant, here's the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness. And I can't talk now because there's this outsider here. Whereas Sister Mary, on the other hand, had thought that the orderly's wink was more on the lines of, Well done, Sister Mary, switched all the babies by herself. Now indicate to me the superfluous child, and I shall remove it and let you go on with your tea with His Royal Excellency, the American culture. And therefore, her own wink had meant, There you go, dearie, that's Baby B. Now take him away and leave me to chat to His Excellency. I've always wanted to ask him why they have those tall buildings with all the mirrors on them. The subtleties of all this were quite lost on Mr. Young, who was extremely embarrassed at all this clandestine affection and was thinking, that Mr. Russell, he knew what he was talking about, and no mistake. Sister Mary's error might have been noticed by the other nun had she not herself been severely rattled by the Secret Service men in Mrs. Dowling's room, who kept looking at her with growing unease. This was because they had been trained to react in a certain way to people in long flowing robes and long flowing headdresses, and were currently suffering from a conflict of signals. Humans suffering from a conflict of signals aren't the best people to be holding guns, especially when they've just witnessed a natural childbirth, which definitely looked an un-American way of bringing new citizens into the world. Also, they'd heard that there were missiles in the building. Mrs. Young stirred. Have you picked a name for him yet? Said Sister Mary archly. Said Mr. Young. Oh, no, not really. If it was a girl, it would have been Lucinda after my mother. or Germain. It was Deirdre's choice. Wormwood's a nice name, said the nun, remembering her classics. Or Damien. Damien's very popular.